tens of thousands of years ago, sunset was never just the end of another day. It was the beginning of a race against time. Today, we watch the sun disappear with peace and comfort. But for early humans, every fading ray of sunlight was a reminder that survival was about to become much harder. There were no lights, no houses, no doors to lock, only endless wilderness, unfamiliar sounds, and a night filled with uncertainty. No one stood still to admire the beautiful sky. Every member of the tribe hurried to prepare, as if an invisible enemy was getting closer with every passing minute. Because they all understood one simple truth: the sun would rise again tomorrow. But there was no promise that everyone would still be alive to witness it. At first, it may seem like there's still plenty of time. But for early humans, every minute before sunset mattered. No one in the tribe stood around doing nothing. Every person had a role. Some hurried into the forest to collect firewood. Others searched for large stones to build a safe fire pit. Meanwhile, a few rushed to the river, filling their containers before darkness swallowed the path. Even the children had responsibilities. They gathered small branches, carried whatever they could, and learned from an early age that survival depended on everyone. No one worked because they wanted to. They worked because the night showed no mercy to those who arrived unprepared. Only a few minutes remained, and suddenly everyone began moving even faster. The final bundle of firewood was placed beside the fire pit. The last container of water returned from the river. Even the children stopped playing and quietly watched the adults. No one said a single word, yet everyone was thinking the same thing. Are we ready? The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. With every passing second, the shadows stretched farther, and the warm orange sky slowly faded into deep blue. The tribe's elder looked toward the horizon and took one deep breath. The time for preparation was over. From this moment on, the night would begin to make the rules. Finding a place to sleep was never a random decision. In the world of early humans, a place that looked safe could be hiding deadly danger. Before the tribe settled down, the most experienced hunter always walked ahead. His eyes scanned the ground, searching for footprints. Did a herd of deer pass through here? Or were those the tracks of a predator beginning its nightly hunt? Then he looked toward the trees. Were the branches freshly broken? Was there an unfamiliar scent carried by the wind? Even a cave that seemed like the perfect shelter could actually be the home of a bear returning before nightfall. At that moment, a single mistake wouldn't mean a bad night. It could mean the end of the entire tribe. After several minutes of searching, the tribe finally found what looked like the perfect campsite. Flat ground, trees that blocked the wind, and fresh water nearby. But early humans never trusted appearances. The tribe's elder walked toward a massive tree, then suddenly stopped. Deep claw marks stretched across the bark. These weren't made by nature. They were left by a powerful predator. Silence filled the air. No one needed an explanation. Everyone understood. This place didn't belong to them. It belonged to something else. Without a single word, the tribe gathered their belongings once again and quietly walked away, choosing to keep searching before darkness claimed the forest. There was no time left to keep searching. The sun was taking its final breath behind the mountains. The tribe paused on a small ridge, silently staring toward the horizon. The light faded away, as if daylight itself was slowly retreating from the world. They weren't afraid of the darkness. They feared what might already be hiding inside it. Night never tells you where danger is, and it never gives you a second chance. The elder made his final decision. They would stop searching, not because they had found the perfect place, but because they had found the safest one. In their world, the best campsite wasn't the most beautiful. It was simply the one that gave you a chance to see another sunrise. Then, the last piece of the sun disappeared. In less than a minute, the world became something entirely different. The trees that stood clearly just moments ago turned into towering black silhouettes. The mountains vanished into darkness, and the path they had walked all day became an empty unknown. Early humans understood that this was the true line between two worlds. One where everything could be seen, and one where only the fire would decide what remained visible. For the first time in hours, everything fell silent. A strange silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. But silence did not mean the night was asleep. It meant something else had just awakened. At first, early humans believed the night was quiet, but only a few minutes later, they discovered the truth. The night was never silent. It was alive with sound, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, the wind weaving through the trees, and distant noises with no visible source. Yet the most frightening sound wasn't a sound at all. It was the sudden silence. When the entire forest stopped making noise, it meant only one thing: a predator was moving through the darkness. At that moment, everyone froze. Even the crackling fire suddenly sounded louder than anything else. In the middle of that endless darkness, fire was far more than a source of warmth. It was the boundary between two worlds. Inside its circle of light, faces were visible, children remained close, and weapons stayed within reach. But beyond it, everything disappeared. Trees became strange shapes. Rocks looked like crouching creatures, and the smallest movement among the branches could mean that something was approaching. That was why no one stepped away from the fire without a reason. Every step beyond its light meant entering a world where humans could not see danger, while danger could still see them. They kept feeding the flames, not only because they feared the cold, but because a weaker fire meant their circle of safety was beginning to shrink. And every time the flames grew lower, the darkness moved one step closer. Once the tribe settled around the fire, not everyone slept at the same time. At least one person had to remain awake. He sat close to the flames, with a weapon beside him, never taking his eyes off the forest. His job was not only to fight, but to notice the first sign of danger. A branch snapping, a shadow moving, footsteps approaching, then suddenly stopping. And sometimes, there was no sound at all. The guard knew that exhaustion was just as dangerous as any predator. If sleep overcame him for only a few minutes, he might wake to a scream, or he might never wake at all. That was why the duty passed from one person to another. One stayed awake, while the others slept, hoping their turn would come before danger did. The hours passed slowly, and with each one, the fire began to lose its strength. The tall flames collapsed into a faint red glow, and the circle of light around the camp gradually became smaller. Faces that had been clear moments earlier were now partly hidden, while the trees seemed to move closer, as if the forest were reclaiming the ground taken by the fire. The guard reacted quickly. He placed another log onto the embers and blew gently, waiting for the flames to rise again. But the wood supply was not endless. If they burned it too quickly, nothing would remain for the coldest hours before dawn. They had to maintain a difficult balance. A fire strong enough to keep predators away, but not so large that it consumed everything they had gathered. On some nights, only one piece of wood might remain. Then the question was no longer how to stay warm. It became, would this final flame survive until the light returned? It began with a faint sound, one footstep between the trees. Then it stopped. The guard slowly raised his head and tightened his grip around his spear. Moments later, another step came from the opposite side. Whatever was out there was not approaching directly. It was circling the camp, moving just beyond the firelight where human eyes could not clearly follow it. Several members of the tribe woke up, but no one moved from their place. The children drew closer to the adults, while the hunters sat with their weapons ready, staring into the darkness. Then a shadow rushed between two trees and vanished before anyone could understand what they had seen. The question was no longer whether something was out there. It became, how many of them were there? The moment the guard noticed movement between the trees, he raised his spear and signaled for everyone to remain silent. The hunters woke quickly and reached for their weapons. The women pulled the children closer, keeping them inside the circle of firelight. No one shouted. Noise might frighten the animals, or provoke them into attacking. The strongest members of the tribe formed a half circle in front of the fire, while the others stayed behind them. Their eyes searched the forest, and their ears followed every movement. Then the first shape stepped into view, a wolf, then another, and then a third. They were not attacking yet. They were testing the tribe, watching the fire, and searching for the weakest point. At that moment, everyone understood that this night was no longer about waiting for dawn. It had become a confrontation. The wolves took another step forward, but stopped at the edge of the firelight. They understood that fire was dangerous, and the tribe knew that retreating now would only invite them closer. So no one waited for the attack. One hunter lifted a burning branch high above his head, while another struck his spear against the ground and shouted. In a single moment, everyone moved forward. The hunters yelled. The torches flared, and the small circle of fire became a wall of light and movement. The wolves slowly backed away. The tribe was not physically stronger, but they appeared larger, louder, and far more dangerous. After several tense moments, the wolves turned and vanished into the forest. No one celebrated. They knew the animals had not gone far. They had only decided to wait for a better opportunity. Several minutes passed after the wolves retreated. But the danger was not over. While everyone watched the trees, the fire began to weaken unnoticed. A cold wind swept through the camp, scattering ash across the embers. The flames suddenly dropped, then vanished. In a single moment, darkness swallowed the faces, the weapons, and everything around them. No one could clearly see the others. They heard rapid movement between the trees, followed by a sound closer than before. The guard knew that rebuilding the fire would take time, but time was the one thing they no longer had. Everyone gathered around the faint embers while one hunter searched desperately for dry wood. And beyond the camp, the wolves began moving forward again. They had realized that the only barrier between them and the tribe was gone. One of the hunters searched the ground with his hands until he found a dry piece of wood beneath their belongings. He placed it over the fading embers, leaned forward, and blew with all the strength left in his lungs. At first, nothing happened. Only a thin cloud of gray smoke rose slowly, while the wolves moved closer. The hunters raised their spears and stood in front of the children. The distance between them and the pack continued to shrink. Step by step, then a tiny orange glow appeared beneath the ash. A single spark. The hunter covered it with thin twigs and blew again. One branch caught fire, then another, and suddenly the flames rose once more. The wolves stopped and instinctively backed away from the light. The fire was still small, but it was enough to return hope to the tribe. That night, weapons alone did not save them. It was the breath of one man protecting a tiny spark and refusing to let it die. More hours passed. Then something small happened, yet it changed everything. It wasn't light, and it wasn't a human voice. It was the first bird singing. The guard quickly looked toward the sky. It was still dark, but the forest no longer felt the same. The sounds that had vanished during the night slowly returned. The insects began chirping again. The air felt slightly warmer, and even the wolves had completely disappeared. Early humans understood these signs well. The night was not over, but it was beginning to lose. For the first time in many hours, everyone breathed a little easier. Dawn had not yet arrived, but they knew it was finally on its way. After hours that seemed endless, the first true ray of sunlight finally appeared. It wasn't bright, but it changed everything. The tops of the trees slowly turned golden. The stars disappeared one by one. The sounds that had haunted them throughout the night were suddenly gone. The wolves had vanished. The forest that had looked like a world full of monsters became nothing more than trees and rocks once again. For the first time, the guards lowered their spears. The children stepped out from behind the adults and looked around with curiosity. Some of the hunters added more wood to the fire, not out of fear this time, but to prepare the first meal after a long night. No one celebrated, but everyone felt something even greater. They had survived another night, And for them, that was enough to begin a new day. As the sun finally rose above the treetops, the world looked completely different. The forest that had terrified them all night was suddenly full of life. Birds began singing once again. Squirrels raced across the branches. Even the wind that had sounded frightening in the darkness became nothing more than a cool morning breeze carrying the scent of the forest. Several hunters walked around the camp, studying the tracks left behind during the night. They found wolf footprints surrounding the campsite. But they found something even more important. None of the animals had crossed the circle where the fire had burned. At that moment they realized the fire had not only given them warmth, it had given them another sunrise. The children quickly returned to playing as if nothing had happened. But the adults knew another night would eventually come. So before anything else, they began collecting firewood again, because they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Preparing for the night begins with the very first light of day. Thousands of nights passed for early humans, and not a single one was easy. Every evening they gathered firewood, searched for a safe place, and watched the forest until sunrise. But over time, they learned how to keep a fire alive for longer. They learned that even a simple shelter offered better protection, and they discovered that survival was far more likely together than alone. Little by little, the night was no longer in control. Humans became the ones who decided where the light would shine. From that moment, the first true step towards civilization had begun.